Hello, welcome to another video of Code Snippet. So in this video, we are going to look into another important aspect of Spring Boot, that is Spring Boot caching. So first of all, we are going to understand what exactly is caching, and after that we will look into how Spring Boot help us achieve caching inside Spring Boot applications. Caching is very important when you are playing with huge amount of data and when you are actually working on microservice architecture. And Spring Boot makes it very easy to make use of cache. So let's get started without wasting any time. So this is going to be a fun video. So sit back, relax and enjoy the show. So let's first go through the agenda over here. So this is basically the agenda. So Spring Boot caching, right? So first we will see what exactly is cache, right? What is the use of cache? Why we exactly need cache, right? After that we will see how we can get started with cache inside Spring Boot applications. After that we are going to look into types of caching. So there are a couple of types, basically in memory and distributed. We will see what exactly is Spring Boot using by default. And while we are looking this, we will also look into multiple annotations that are needed in order to enable caching and make use of caching inside Spring Boot applications, right? So that is basically the overall agenda of this particular video. So this is going to be a very important video as we are looking into important concept, that is Spring Boot caching. So let's get started with what is cache, right? So let's go to this canvas over here and let's try to understand what exactly is cache through this example, right? So let's say we have a library, right? And there is this librarian and people are coming to get some books, right? Now for each person's request, what this librarian will do, he will go to this library and he will fetch some kind of book which this particular person is asking, right? He will fetch the books and he will give it to that particular person, right? Now for each person, this poor guy is going to this bookshelf, finding the book and returning it to this particular person, right? So that they can go ahead and read the book, right? So this poor guy is basically tired, but this guy is smart. So what he is doing now, he is finding a trend that there are many people who wants Harry Potter book, right? Because Harry Potter book is very popular, right? So what this guy will do, this guy will go over here to bookshelf. He will pick the bunch of Harry Potter book and he will keep it on the desk, right? So that next person who wants the Harry Potter book, this librarian don't have to go to this bookshelf, rather he can just pick this book from his desk and give it to that particular person. And in this approach, he will just save his time to go to this particular bookshelf in order to get the books, right? This guy is making his life easy, right? So consider this library is our application and this particular shelf is basically our database, right? So this particular librarian is going to this database and fetching the data. So our application is sending the request to fetch the data and it keeps on doing that on each request, right? But this stack is basically the cache that comes into picture. So what we are doing over here, the frequently accessed data, we are storing it inside a cache so that we don't have to send the request to this particular database, right? Let me just create another diagram in order to visualize that. So for example, let's say this is your application, right? So this is your application, right? So this is our application and let's say we have a database, right? So let me just create a DB over here. So let's say this is basically the database over here. Now our application will get the request to get the data from DB, right? So what we will do, we will call the DB, we will make a call to DB and fetch the data and return it to the user, right? Now what we can do over here, we can introduce a cache in between your application and database. So it will be here. So it will be a layer between your application and your database, right? And the frequently accessed data we will store over here in the cache so that we can directly return it to user without visiting your database, right? So database is basically one example, right? We can also think of a microservice based architecture. Let's say there is some other service, right? Let's say there is another application, app2, and our application have to make a request to this particular application in order to get the data. Again, the frequently accessed data for which the response is not going to change for a long time, we can store that data over here inside cache. And now instead of calling this particular app, our application directly will call our cache and get the data, and this will save a lot of time and efforts for us, right? So that is basically the cache and that is basically the use of the cache, right? Now what is the use of cache, right? So as we have seen, it will reduce the latency. That means faster access to data compared to fetching from database or external service, right? So over here, instead of going to DB or other service, we are getting it from the cache, right? After that, it will decrease the load on your backend services. It will reduce the number of calls to your backend systems or database, right? And it will improve the scalability, which will help applications handle large traffic and load effectively, right? Efficiently. So that is why we make use of caching in order to reduce the latency of your application, decrease the load on your backend, and increase the scalability of your application. So that is basically the use of cache. And cache is very, very important when it comes to microservice architecture, because you need to cache multiple things, right? It is a very, very important concept, and understanding it is very, very important. So that is basically cache. So we have seen what exactly is cache, right? Right, so let's get started and let's jump into the code and let's see how we can implement cache inside Spring Boot, right? So let me just go to IntelliJ over here. So this is basically the project that we are going to look into this video, right? So let's just quickly go through this particular project. So I have created some basic code so that we won't waste time on writing the basic codes over here, which we already know. So in this video, we are going to look into weather service, right? So it's a weather service which will give us the weather data, right? So we will save and get the weather data. So here we have one controller, weather controller, right? So it has one request mapping weather, and we have get mapping, post mapping, and get all, right? So we have 3 APIs over here. After that, we have weather service over here. So we have this function get weather by city, right? In order to get the weather for respective city, right? So we have this particular function, and we are making use of weather repository over here, which is basically a JPA repository, right? So JPA repository we have already seen, right? And we have a weather entity over here. This is basically the entity where we have weather city, weather forecast, right? So these details we are going to store, and we are making use of H2 database over here. If you look into resources, I have this simple H2 configuration that we know already, that we have been using into multiple our applications, right? So that is basically the simple application. So we have seen this entity, we have seen this repository, and here in the controller, what I am doing over here, let me expand this. Here, when I am doing post mapping, I am directly saving details by using weather repository, right? This get weather will get the details from this particular get weather by city function, which is inside weather service. Let me just run this application real quick. Let me just rerun it and let it come up. So it is up now. So what we will do, we will just go to Postman. Let me just bring my Postman real quick. Here it is. And what we will do, let's just add a quick weather, right? Let's add weather for Pune, right? So what I will do, I'll just send it. So the weather for Pune is added over here. And now what we have over here is we have get API. What we will do, we will get the weather of Pune over here. I will just send it, and we will get the respective output. That means our API is working fine, which is giving us the weather of Pune city, right? No problem, everything is working smooth like butter, right? What we will do, we'll go back over here. So that is basically our application. That was the quick overview, right? Now let's get started. Now what get call we have over here? So we have this get weather by city over here. Let's go inside this. So what we can do here, what we are doing, we are making a DB call through this repository, right? So weather repository dot find by city, right? So that is something which we are doing. Now what we can do, we can cache this data. So how to cache this data, that we will see, right? So first, in order to make use of Spring Boot caching, what you need to do is you need to enable caching, right? Enable caching inside this application. And how you can do that? So if you remember, we have few annotations, right? So if you remember, we have this enable caching annotation. Now what is enable caching annotation? As the name suggests, it will enable us to make use of caching inside Spring Boot, right? Now this annotation needs to be added on top of your configuration class or a main class, right? So what you can do, either you can add a config. So you can create a new package, right? And you can say config. What I will do, I'll create a new config class, new Java class, let's say app config. And on this class, I can give configuration annotation. And along with configuration annotation, I can make use of enable caching, right? So that is something you need to make use of in order to enable caching, right? So you can give it on top of your configuration class, or rather you can give it inside main application as well. So here also you can make use of enable caching. So here also you can make use of, this will make it simple, right? Because this is again configuration class. So if you go inside Spring Boot application, you should have a configuration annotation over here. So here you have Spring Boot configuration, and inside that you have configuration annotation. So ultimately this particular class becomes your configuration class, which is again your main application class in this case, right? And you can add it over here as well, right? So as we have created app config, so that this is something which is not needed anymore. So as we have created this app config, now let's remove it from here. So it's not needed over here. It will just be a duplicate config, right? So that is basically your enable caching annotation. So now we have added this particular enable caching. That means the caching is enabled inside our application, right? So what I will do now, I will just run this application in debug mode, right? And what I will do, let it come up. So our application is started now. So what I will do over here, we'll go back to our Postman and I will quickly add one weather data over here. So Pune I have added again. And now what we will do, let's add few debug points over here. So let me go to controller. What I will do over here, I will add a debug point over here. I will go to get weather city. I will add a debug point over here, right? And I will enable this particular debugging. And now I will hit this particular API, get API basically. So as you can see, we are in the controller. So our request is here in the controller. And now what I will do, I will move forward and the request will go to this particular service, right? So keep in mind that we are going to service in this case. Currently, we don't have any caching mechanism, right? So we are going inside service. What it will do, it will fetch the data from DB. This step will fetch it for us and it will just return the data. And you will have this particular data return on your Postman, right? So that is basically it. Let's try to run it again. So what I will do, I will try to send this request again and I will again move ahead. So again, we are going inside service and again, we will fetch the data and it is returning the data and we will move forward and this guy will return the data to our Postman, right? So we will again have the data inside Postman. Let's try to send it third time. So again, we are over here. Again, it will go inside your service, weather service, and it will fetch it from the data, your database basically, and it will return the data to your client, right? No matter how many times you are sending the same request for same city, you are hitting the database again and again, right? Which is not basically needed. What we can do, we can cache this data instead, right? How we can cache? You can cache the output of this particular entire function by using a single annotation. What is that annotation? Let's go back to this particular agenda. So here we have seen enable caching and second is cacheable. So we can make use of cacheable annotation to cache the output of this particular method for same input, right? So what I will do, I will just say cacheable and you need to give some name to this particular cache, right? So what name we can give? We can give weather as a name. So weather will be the name of this particular cache, right? What we will do now, let me just reload this particular application, stop and rerun. So it should come up just fine. Let's go back to our Postman. Let's make a post request. So this will add a data inside our application. And what we will do, we'll just make a get call, right? Now observe carefully, right? So if I move now, if I click next, now we are going inside service, right? So here we have cacheable, and as this is the first request we are making, we are landing inside this particular method, right? Now let's move forward. Now we are making a DB call. Now we are getting the data from the database, and now we got the data, and now we will return the data to our client. So you will have the output on your Postman, right? Now this was first time, that's why we are hitting the data, your database basically, right? But let's say what happens in the second request. So what I will do, I will send it again, and now observe carefully, right? So I have this debug point inside our weather service. I have this debug point, right? So it should ideally land over here. But let's say what happens now when I click on next. Go to controller and let me click on next. What happened? It did not land inside your service. It directly returned it to your client, right? In order to demonstrate that, what I will do so that we can see it clearly, let me just introduce a local variable over here and return that variable instead, so that we can have a debug point over here and see what exactly is happening, right? So what I will do, I'll rerun this application. Let's go back over here. What I will do, I will add this particular weather again and I will send this get request. Now this is again a first request since we have reloaded our application. Let's go. So we landed inside our service, right? So we will go to repository. We will fetch the data from database. We will return it. And now we have weather by city over here, and we are returning it to our client. Our client have the data. Client is happy, right? What we will do, we will send another request. Now observe. Now I still have this particular debug point inside our get weather by city, but let's see if it is going there. If I click on resume, it directly went to next line, returning this particular output, weather by city, which is sunny 27 degrees Celsius, right? It skipped this particular execution because it is picking up things from cache, right? It is picking up things from cache. Now if I click on resume, it will directly return things to your client. That is basically how you can cache things by using cacheable annotation inside your Spring Boot application. Very, very simple, right? We make use of only one annotation over here and it's caching things for us, right? Now, how we can look the cache, right? How we can see what exactly is inside the cache. So in order to do that, I have created this particular simple service over here. So this particular cache inspection service, right? So what we will do, let's just quickly go through this guy. So here we have this particular service and we have cache manager, right? So this cache manager is coming from Spring Framework, which manages entire cache lifecycle, right? And here I have a simple method which will print cache contents by cache name. So we'll pass the cache name, right? So we have created a cache over here by using this name. What we can do, we can pass this name and it will just print the content for us, right? Now what we can do, let me just add a few debug points over here, and what I will do, I'll just create a API which will trigger this for us. So what I will do, I will go over here in the weather controller and add a simple API over here. So first thing I will do over here is I will inject this cache inspection service. So this guy I will just inject, I will say auto wired, I'll auto wire it, and what I will do, I'll create a simple get API over here. That is basically the API that we have created. Now what we can do, let's just rerun our application. So it should be started. Now let's go back over here. Let me add one city over here and I will make a get request. I will make a get request over here. And as this is the first request, it will go inside our service. It will fetch the data for us. It will return the data to us, right? So here we got the data. Client is happy, right? So what we can do, let's send another request, right? So what I will do, I'll send another request. So this time it should return things from the cache, right? So it is not going to service, returning from the cache, right? Now let's go ahead and call our this particular endpoint, right? What I will do, I will go over here. I will just duplicate this tab, and what I will do, let me just quickly check if we have debug points. So let me just add a debug point over here, and we already have debug points over here. I will just send it. It will come inside our application, and let's proceed now. Let's proceed. As you can see, the cache is not null. What is there inside a cache? See what is there inside a cache. So this is basically the cache. The name is weather, and we have a store with one element where we are storing this Pune data over here, right? So this particular entry is present inside our application in a concurrent hash map. So if you see over here, we have a concurrent hash map, right? So this guy is basically storing data inside concurrent hash map, right? So if you go back over here, then we have types of cache over here. So first one is in memory, right? In memory cache is basically the cache which is created inside a memory of your application, right? So it is a part of your application. So if you see this implementation, we never mentioned which cache I want to use. Did I mention? No. That's why this guy is making use of a concurrent hash map and storing all the cache data in memory. So this will be basically stored inside the heap area basically, right? So it will be stored inside heap memory, and this concurrent hash map will store this particular cache data and return details from here only, right? So that is basically the in-memory cache that we are talking about, right? So it's an in-memory cache, but in-memory cache have some problems, right? For example, let's say you have an application, right? You have an application, you have deployed your application inside production, right? So you have this application and you have a node 1, right? So this is node 1. Now you are doing horizontal scaling, right? So you have second node over here which is running your same application. Now you need another instance because your load is increasing. So you will create another node, right? So this is basically the horizontal scaling, right? You scale instances of your application. Now when you have in-memory cache, each of the instance will have its own cache. Now this guy will have its own in-memory cache, right? And it will cache things over here. This node 2 will have its own cache, right? And this node 3 again will have its own cache, right? Now let's say you have an element cached inside all three these nodes, right? All three nodes. And now one of the node is updating the data inside DB. Now the cache of that guy will be updated, but the cache of other nodes will still have older data, right? That is basically the problem that happens when it comes to in-memory cache. In-memory cache is fine if you only have one node, right? But when it comes to multiple nodes, it will start creating a problem because each node will have its own cache and it will create a problem, right? Because each node's in-memory cache can have a different kind of data and it will lead to data inconsistencies, right? That is when we need some kind of a distributed caching, a distributed caching. When we say distributed caching, it is something called as, it is like you do not have in-memory cache, you do not have all these, right? So let me just remove this, and you have a single cache which is out of your application. So now this guy is not inside your application, rather it's outside your application, and now all the nodes that will be created will be connected to this particular cache, right? Because this guy is outside your application now and they are referring to same cache, right? The famous example of distributed caching is basically Redis, right? Redis is basically a cache which is widely used, right? So Redis is basically distributed caching, and how we can connect it to Spring Boot application, well, something which we are going to look into the next video, right? So next video we will see how we can connect our application to Redis and perform caching, right? For now in this video we will stick to in-memory cache and we will understand all these points, right? Now let's go back over here. So we have this particular cache. Now complete this call, and what we can do, let's add a couple of more data over here. What I will do, I'll say Pune, now I'll say Mumbai, right? Mumbai is pretty hot, so let's say 35 degrees, right? So let me send the data. So that is added. Let's add another one. Let's add Manali. Manali is pretty cool, right? So let's add 50 degrees Celsius and let's change this to cloudy, right? Cloudy. I'm not sure cloudy is correct, but let's see cloudy, right? And let's send it. So that is something which we have sent, right? Now I will just say Manali over here. Let's send it, and again I will say Mumbai, right? So we have got the respective data. Now let's call our other API. Let me just enable debugging before that. I'll send it, and now let's see what we have inside our cache. Now if I see, so now you have Mumbai, Pune and Manali. So all these things are added inside our cache, right? That is how your cache will be updated. Your concurrent hash map will be updated over here. That is how you can see what exactly is going on inside your cache, right? That is basically your cacheable annotation, and that's how you can make use of cacheable annotation in order to cache the data, right? Right, so we have seen cache in Spring Boot. We have seen type of caching in memory and distributed. After that, we are looking into annotations. We have seen enable caching and cacheable annotation. So next we will see CachePut, right? So let's go back over here. So now let's say I add another functionality over here, which will update the weather based on city, right? So what we will do, we will just update the existing weather, and I will have this particular method over here, which will just find that particular city for us, update the weather and save it back inside DB, right? Now let's quickly run this code and let's see if it is updating, right? So let me just go back over here. Let me just post one weather for Manali, let's say. And what I will do, let's say if we are getting it, so we are getting it as well. And now let's duplicate this particular API. Let me just duplicate this tab and let's add our update API, right? So I will go back over here and I will say weather, and whether we have Manali city, right? Manali, and we need one query parameter over here as well. which is request parameter, which is weather update, right? So I will just add weather update. So updated weather basically, right? What weather we had? Let's go back over here and let's make it sunny, and let's make it sunny, right? So Manali is sunny, but it probably won't go to 27. Let's say 22, and let me send it. Method not allowed. Let me just say put mapping, as we have put mapping over here. So now it is updated, right? And now if I go back to get and try to get it again, let me go to this particular get and let's try to get it. Did you see what happened? We are still getting the older data, right? So we are still getting cloudy 15 degrees, but we have updated it, right? We have updated, but why we are getting older data, right? So in order to validate if it is updated inside DB, what we can do, let me just go over here. I will say /h2 console and it will take us to this particular console, right? So what username and password we have added? Password is as password over here. So let me just add that password and let's try to connect, right? So we have connected over here. Let me just zoom it a bit so that it's clear, and let's try to look into what we have inside weather, right? So let's see, let's execute select star, and do you see over here we have sunny 22 degrees Celsius, but in the get API we are getting cloudy. Why we are getting cloudy? Because this is being returned from our cache, right? So that is a problem, isn't it? So what we need over here is whenever we are updating this particular data, our cache also should be updated, isn't it? It's not being updated. Cache is not updated over here. That's why this guy is not being executed and returning us the older data, right? What we need to do, we need to update this particular cache, right? So in order to do that, we can make use of CachePut, right? So what CachePut will do, it will just save the data inside database and it will update this weather cache as well, right? So it is doing two things. It will first save the data and update the cache, right? So that next time when we do get call, we are not getting the older data, right? Let me just stop and rerun this application. And now let's play. So here what I will do, I'll post weather again. So let's say we have a cloudy now. So what I will do, I'll say get call, so that we are getting data from cache. So by this moment we should have data in cache as well. In order to validate, we can make use of this particular API, right? So let me just start the debugger. Let's send it and let's check what we have inside our cache. If you see over here, we have this particular cache over here, and in this cache we have, just expand it, we have one element which is Manali and 15 degree, right? So let's just proceed, and what I will do now, I will update it. I will update it to sunny 22 degrees and I will send it. Now it should be updated. Now let's again check what we have inside our cache. So if we go back over here and let's see, so now we still have cloudy, and let's go back over here and let's try to hit the get API. So we are still getting cloudy over here. But now if you carefully observe over here, there is one more entry added inside our cache, right? So here if you see, we have one more entry where we have value as sunny, right? But the key is different, as this is a hash map, right? Concurrent hash map. The key is simple key Manali and sunny 22 degrees Celsius, right? Key is different in this data and this data. That's why our guy Cacheable is returning this data and it's not aware of the other key over here, which is this particular simple key, right? This is leading to inconsistencies inside the cache, right? So cache is similar, but it is adding a different entry instead of updating the same entry, right? So what we can do in order to solve this problem, let's go back over here to our weather service. So what we can do, we can provide a key to our cache, right? So let's say we give some kind of key, let's say hash city, right? So let's say this city key we are giving over here, and the same key we will give over here, right? So here what I will do, I will add key and I will name it as hash city, right? And now let's rerun this application and let's see how our cache looks like in this case. So what I will do, I'll just add some data over here. Let's say Manali, cloudy 15 degrees. Let me just get it a couple of times so that it is added inside cache. Let me just enable debugging and let's see what happens now inside our cache. Let's proceed. And here if you observe the cache now, let me just open that. Now here key is city name, right? Now let's try to update. Now what I will do, I will go over here and try to update it to Sunny, right? And now let's observe our cache. Just enable the debugging again and let's try to send it again. And let's observe the cache now, right? So now if you see the same key is updated. Do you see any other entry over here? No, because we are giving consistent keys over here. Because we are giving city name as the key over here, that's why the same key is updated, right? And now if I make the get call here, if I make the get call, then you will get Sunny as output. That means our cache is updated just fine, right? So that is basically the significance of your CachePut, and that is basically the significance of this key over here, right? So when we define a key, this particular attribute inside your weather entity will be treated as a key of your concurrent hash map, right? And it will be similar everywhere, right? So in order to understand this significance, you should know the problem that will be created. That's why I did not highlight this key in the first place. And in the second example, when we actually got the problem, we resolved it by using this key and we got the significance of this key, right? That is basically the key attribute and the CachePut annotation, right? So we have seen CachePut as well over here. So go back over here and check CachePut over here. So finally, let's go ahead and let's look into CacheEvict, right? So again, it is pretty similar to CachePut, but it's other scenario, right? So let's see what exactly is that scenario. Now let's say I have added one more API over here. So I have added delete mapping now, so which will delete the data, the weather data by using city, right? So what I will do, I will just say repository.delete by city, right? So this particular function inside your weather repository, right? So this will just delete it. So let me just rerun this code and let's see what happens now. What I will do, I will go back over here, add a mapping over here. Let's say Manali, cloudy 15 degrees. I try to get it a couple of times so that it's added inside cache, and now I will delete it. Once I hit delete, it will delete it from the database, right? So let's just go and confirm that our database. Let me reload this guy. Let me just log in again and let's try to find weather data. So as you can see, there is no data as we have deleted that, right? Let's go back over here and let's try to get it now, right? So what I will do, I will send this request again. As you can see, we are still getting the data, but this data is not coming from database, rather it is coming from your cache, because it is not deleted from the cache when we deleted this particular Manali weather from the database, right? Now in this case, CacheEvict come from rescue. So what we can do, we can add CacheEvict and we can add again same thing over here, which we have over here, right? So same value and same key so that it deletes the value with the same key from the cache. And now what CacheEvict will do, once the data is deleted from the database, it will delete it from your cache as well, so that we have consistent data inside cache, right? So I will just stop and rerun the code. Let's see what happens in this case. Now what I will do, I will add some data, right? And I will get it couple of times, right? After that I will delete it, right? So now that is deleted. Now let's try to get it again. So this time the weather data is not available, right, inside cache, because we have deleted it while deleting the weather, and we have deleted it from the cache as well by using CacheEvict. That is basically CacheEvict for us. Very, very simple, right? So we have seen CacheEvict as well. So we have seen pretty much everything, right? So in the next video, what we are going to look into is we are going to make use of Redis cache, and we are going to connect to Redis cache from our Spring Boot application and perform similar kind of operations on that particular cache, which is basically distributed type of caching in this case, right? So that is something which we will do in the next video. So I hope you have clear understanding of what is Spring Boot caching, how we can implement that, what is type of caching, what are the annotations that we need in order to make use of cache inside your application. So if you like this video, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to Code Snippet. Share this video with your friends so that they also have idea about Spring Boot caching. That's it for this video. See you in the next video.